I went out on the road 11 years ago, a little more. And if you could have been with me during these years, just sailing with a lobsterman off the coast of Maine, or visiting a one-room schoolhouse down here in the bayous of Louisiana, or talking with men and women on the streets of Atlanta, or Chinese Americans in San Francisco, just listening to people talk in all the varied accents of this country about their aspirations for themselves and their country. I think you would agree with me that people of all races and ages and conditions really care for their country a good deal more than you would think from the current emphasis on what a selfish place we have become. And seek, in fact, for leadership to heal the country's wounds. But most important of all, see the grace and worth and joy of taking part themselves in binding up the country's injuries, of becoming a part of the national conscience. I think that's a big change in America, that's irrevocable, and that it's something to be confident and reassured about. So I persuaded my bosses to let me and a camera crew go out and just see what we could find without any assignments, just wander. And they said, sure, go ahead and do it till the end of the year. The year was 1967. And when the 1968 rolled around, they said, well, if you want to keep doing it, just keep doing it. So to show you how long ago it was, I said to this cameraman, we'll go in a couple of station wagons. And he said, no, let's go in a motor home. And I said, what's a motor home? Do we need anybody to change tires? We could use some help. Motor home technology is not very far advanced, you know, and nowhere near as far advanced as the audiovisual industry. And so it really is true that those things break down all the time. Half of the college journalism graduates in America think that it would be to our advantage if they could come and join on the road. They think of it as a romantic thing, and they're right, you know. There is an undeniable romance in plugging in the coffee pot in the morning and heading down the road, not entirely sure where you're going to end up that night, and looking for little postcards to send to Walter Cronkite along the way.
Mr. Kuralt, do you see your role as more or less doing the footnotes on the news, the serendipity in America?
Well, there's no doubt that they're footnotes. I try to keep any importance out of those stories because everybody else is doing important stories, and I think it's all right once in a while to have a footnote on the air. I don't know. I don't have any very deep, well-developed philosophical feelings about On the Road. They're just stories that must, in my view, always be about people who you wouldn't expect to see on the CBS Evening News.
It certainly would seem that doing that kind of story instead of the hard news being in Washington where things are breaking, that your own perspective on world events, world news would change. Do things that happen in Washington take on less significance when you're on the road?
I suppose in some ways the opposite is true. I learned a long time ago that if you were in Saigon during the Vietnam War, the war did not seem quite as devastating and terrible as it did from watching television back home. And during the years that I've been on the road, we've had so many crises, you know, the violence that was associated with the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War after that and the Watergate after that and the energy crisis and inflation and the crises that seem almost big enough to bring the country down just go on and on. But you don't have any, somehow they seem worse, I think, from far. You read about all that in the coffee shop in the morning and then walk out into the America of the back roads and small towns, and there you find much to be confident and reassured about, even in the midst of crisis. You know, it does seem to me sometimes that there are two worlds, the worlds of the headlines and the one we all live in.
You have a lot of fun?
Oh, do I have a lot of fun. Every time I think about giving up on the road to settle down and do something else, I realize that I'd have to give up all that freedom. It's a wonderful and sort of undeniably romantic thing to be able to just wander through this country at will.
Do you think you ever could give it up, or are you hooked?
I'm hooked.